Welcome to the HEARTS Entwined podcast. In this podcast, we'll be having discussions around the secrets which attract lasting, healthy, fulfilling relationships, creating a healthy mindset, and what women should know and understand about men. Introducing your host, Lyn Smith, the Queen of Hearts, relationship expert, trainer, speaker, and best-selling author of the Cupid's Bow technique. Lyn's mission is to have a positive impact in reducing divorce, domestic violence, and suicide.
Welcome to the HEARTS Entwined podcast. This is your host, Lyn Smith, the Queen of Hearts. And today, listeners, we're going to be talking about all things single, how to be single and thriving, how to be single and loving your life and preparing for if and when you decide that you're going to be ready for dating. And I've got a very special guest today that is an expert in all this sort of area. Her name is Serena Faith. So welcome, Serena.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Now, Serena, you're a dating coach for single women and specifically around, helping women get themselves ready for love if they should then choose to sort of look for a partner going forward. Just tell us a little bit about you and what's led you to be doing what you're doing now.
So I have quite the checkered past overall, and I actually am like a former tarot reader, and I worked for some pretty big name psychic sites, and I found myself dealing with a lot of people who I know were trapped in patterns, and they had a lot of wounds from like their childhood or experiences as teenagers, and sometimes it was like abusive relationships that tied them into like these dating patterns and being attracted to these same kind of people where they were losing themselves and engaging in unhealthy behaviors and chasing people who are emotionally unavailable. But it was so hard on these psychic sites because these people were so focused and so stuck in these wounds, and I knew what they needed and I knew where they were coming from, but I wasn't helping them like I feel I'm meant to truly help women break out of patterns and help women heal. And I ended up going through a breakup myself that I thought this was my person. I thought I had done a lot of trauma work. I thought I had done healing, and I ended up going through this process and rebirthing myself. And I suddenly realized, I want to help other women go through what I went through and understand these patterns and understand and focus more on self-love after a breakup, and focusing on building their life, so that if they do decide to date again, they aren't repeating the patterns and they find someone who more or less complements them.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think a lot of people are afraid of being single, aren't they? And then enter another relationship only to, like you say, repeat the patterns of what happened in the previous relationship.
Yeah. And I think there's a huge fear around, being single. I think, for each person, it's a little different, but I think that for me, it was attached to like abandonment. Like there was like this fear of being abandoned and being alone. And so it was terrifying for me at first, because I always wanted someone to save me, or I always wanted someone to do it. And I was working out of these wounds from my childhood, these wounds from my father, these wounds from my brother. And it was this huge, just like loop that I found myself stuck in. And it was this root of being scared of being alone. And it was rooted also deeper into this abandonment wound and not feeling like I was good enough for someone to love. I was not good enough. And a lot of people have this very similar, obviously their story's different than mine. Obviously this wound might manifest slightly different or have different basic needs from their inner child. And it is scary, and then we have the social pressure or the cultural pressure that, we have to be, married in a house with kids, especially as women, in our late 20s. And that's not realistic in this day and age. We're breaking out of those patterns and we're choosing our happiness over, what we're told that we're supposed to do that isn't always fulfilling.
No, that's true. And I think a lot of women are very conscious of the biological clock, aren't they? And if they do want children, sometimes they can choose the wrong relationships because they think this might be their final chance.
Yeah, that biological clock is the real thing. And I think that it ties this into, and I hate saying like desperation in a bad way, but this desperation that, I'm not a proper woman, I'm not fulfilling what I'm supposed to do. And so it gets into this desperation as you get closer to that clock ending, that you're willing to just do it with anybody, and you don't take the time to align the values and the morals and the dreams and the parenting styles as well, and truly know that person and their wounds. Like, have they healed enough that they're not going to repeat the patterns that their family had passed down for generation? Are they going to pass that down onto my kid?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's like you say, society that's a lot to blame, and quite often sometimes as well, parent pressure and maybe sibling pressure and family pressure. If you're still single in your 20s or 30s, that might be putting you in that space where you feel like you need to be in a relationship.
Yeah, and it's not a, and I'm a firm believer in connection. I'm a firm believer that, relationships inherently aren't bad, but with how we reflect our wounds and society's kind of concept around unhealthy relationships and, the Disney princess, dream, we really truly just lose ourselves. And women especially, like, we have that stereotype that we have to break out where, and I think women are starting to really wake up to, I am more than just a housewife. I am more than just a mother. I'm allowed to have a career. I'm allowed to have, a life. And we're craving that, we're craving that freedom to be an equal versus, a housemaid and someone who raises the kid. We want connection. We want intimacy outside of the physical aspects. We want to feel like we're equal and respected. And that's such a hard pattern to break out if you have a religious, aspect, or what you were taught growing up. My father told me to go find a rich man to take care of me. And so it's one of my biggest goals to be painfully successful, that I don't need a man to provide for me and my child. I don't need a man to take care of me. I can do all of that. He's in my life because I want him, right?
Yeah, and I think that needs to change educationally, not only, from parents educating the children, but also within schools as well, doesn't it?
Yep. Yeah, well, absolutely.
In the school system, there isn't this proper education about, what is a healthy relationship? What does that look like? And, if you're not going to go into the dating world, fully confident and having done a bit of work on yourself, depending on what your previous past has been like. I'm not saying everybody's got childhood wounds. Some people are born into healthy relationships, and some people do have parental role models that are healthy role models, but quite often that isn't the case, is it?
No, unfortunately it's not. I'm thinking that it's shifting, when I'm a single mom. I am in a relationship, but I haven't integrated them fully where I feel like I can let go of the term, single parent. But I feel that we are making those shifts in, these people who are in their 30s and 40s. We are being very aware of it, but it's like we're the ones who are being really burdened with breaking out of all of that and teaching our children and trying to get the schools to educate better. But yeah, some people are really just given phenomenal examples, phenomenal parenting. But like you said, not everybody is born with that. And we kind of have to become adults and unravel that. And, if you do choose to be a parent, making sure that you unravel just enough where, your kids aren't getting all of it. I mean, there's no such thing as a perfect parent. We can't filter everything out and save our children from everything if you've been through so much, but enough where it's easier for your kids and we can break those patterns with our children. Like I said, if you choose, I'm for choosing if you want to be a parent or not. But that's just a very relevant thing for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel that, sometimes we can be a product of our influencers, with that might be our main carers or parents usually, and if they haven't been good role models, we can choose, like you say, to decide that, okay, my father was a drunk, so I'm going to be a drunk. Or we can choose the opposite and think, well, I'm never going to be like them because they were not good examples.
Yes, exactly. But it's like a catch-22, because it's, am I going to repeat this pattern? But a lot of people who are stuck repeating the patterns of their parents, there's oftentimes, and so you kind of have to like wake up and then also do the work, like to do the work to break those patterns, because these things that we witness our parents do, as children, how they showed up for us, that imprints deeply into our subconscious and deeply into us. And you have to become consciously aware. And it's a lot of work. It's not easy to break those patterns. It's not easy to look at yourself and say, wow, I'm kind of problematic, or I'm doing these things that I thought was okay, but apparently it's not, and I have to relearn it, and I have to change my thought patterns and see how they affect my behaviors and my emotions. And so it's a lot of work, but I feel worth it. It's better than being stuck in the patterns and stuck miserable and stuck, wondering what's wrong with you, and why, oh, I can't, why can't I ever find anybody good enough? Why do I keep doing this, and getting sucked into that like kind of pity party, like poor me, like waking up and saying, I'm going to get to the root of this, and I'm going to do things differently. That's a lot of work, and not everybody wants to do it, or is capable of doing it for whatever reason. It's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I find a lot of my clients typically fall into two categories. One is the needy, desperate, energy that obviously is not going to attract a healthy relationship, but that sometimes don't even realize they're coming across like that. And the other is the one that's been through some heartbreak or some hurt or trauma in the past, that totally closed off, that doesn't
Yep.
want to open their heart to new love.
Yeah, and that hyper independence, like that's a really big issue, in my opinion. Is, I understand the point of being single and taking that time to heal, but so many of us just naturally will start shifting into that hyper independence, where it's rooted deeply in that fear of abandonment, that fear of getting hurt. And I'm kind of like a firm believer of, yes, we have to do some healing when we're single. Yes, we can't expect someone to save us, but we get to a point in our healing where you can't learn to be in a healthy relationship by being single. You get to a point in your healing where you have to start applying it, and you have to start actively practicing self-love and communication with another person.
So anybody listening to this who can identify with what we've been talking about, Serena, what's the starting point? What tips would you give as to, something they could easily implement straight away?
So I think one of the first things that you can really do is starting to work with like your inner child as well as your inner teenager, because that's where a lot of the root around this stuff is. And so identifying, what your inner child wants. Your inner child wants to be loved. Your inner child doesn't want to be cherished, doesn't want to be seen and heard. And then looking at how the teenager will try to self-sabotage that, or develops unhealthy behaviors in attempts to get those needs met, and then doing that parenting. Because when you realize, my inner child just wants to be loved, and my inner teenager will act out in this attempt through, for example, engaging sexually, with people and trying to find love through sex. That's not healthy. And so kind of identifying, what you're trying to fulfill through these dating patterns, and then starting to make the step of stepping in and saying, you know what, this hasn't worked for me in the past. This hasn't worked. So what do I need to start doing? And kind of developing that self-discipline. And then taking a look at, the red flags that, take a look at your past relationships and being like, okay, what are the red flags that I didn't know about because nobody taught, that I can now know, and starting to kind of like identify what those red flags are, but also the green flags of like, what would a green flag look like? What does a healthy person look like? And so those are kind of like the tips that I really work with on people, is like, developing an awareness around the inner child and the inner teenager and how to reparent them. And then kind of doing like the red flags and like the green flags, and reflecting a lot on the past, and signs of, am I repeating this pattern, or am I doing something different now?
Yeah, and absolutely taking responsibility for your part in those previous relationships if they haven't worked out, rather than pointing the finger and saying it's always been the other person's fault.
Yeah, and a lot of people get stuck in that. And it's always kind of a tricky point for because some people have been in very abusive relationships, and that's not necessarily their fault, you know. I know for me, I had someone once say I was in this abusive relationship, and someone said, "Well, what's your part in it?" And I was like so offended. I was like, I don't deserve this. This isn't my fault. But my fault was, my fault, quote unquote, was staying too long and allowing myself to get bitter, to get angry, to start acting in ways that I didn't think I could possibly act out. And also just not knowing what boundaries were. And I don't want to necessarily say that's my part in it. I wasn't taught these things, but that is what my part was. Whether, and it's such a fine tune because sometimes we are victims. Sometimes we do have abuse happen, but we still have to take a look and say, okay, well, what about me stayed in the situation?
Yeah,
What
absolutely. I
about me
can put my
allowed this
hand up.
stuff?
Yeah, I can put my hand up in, staying in relationships which weren't healthy, and look back now and see my part in that. What was, like you just mentioned, not having healthy boundaries in place, accepting unacceptable behavior, seeing the red flags, but making excuses for them, so that we've always got our own part to play in that situation, haven't we?
It's true. It's true. Even if it's a subconscious thing, we don't always consciously want to pick these type of relationships, these type of people. But when it's all we know, it's all we know, and it's all we're going to continue to do until we make a choice to do things differently and do the healing.
And I think sometimes we stay in relationships too long that aren't good for us because we don't want to give up on the fact that we made a poor choice. Sometimes it's the ego
Yeah.
thing, isn't it? That I don't want to be seen as a failure.
Yep, yep. And I think that's also rooted into that abandonment, kind of those abandonment fears of abandonment as well. Like I know for me, like, it's this scared of fear of being alone. It's this fear of abandonment. But really at the end of the day, I'm just abandoning and neglecting my needs. I'm abandoning and neglecting myself by staying in that. And that's another way that my abandonment wound would show up.
So in terms of any self-love exercises, because I think a lot of people, until they become aware of the fact they've not been treating themselves very well, aren't really aware of, where do I need to start with looking, at implementing and actually acting on loving myself. What does that mean?
So what does that mean? So for me, when the work that I've done on myself and what I do and what I try to have my clients do is having conversations with my inner child and taking some time to kind of take some deep breaths and ask myself, what am I feeling right now? Like, am I sad? Am I hurt? Why am I feeling this way? And like also the process of validating my emotions and saying, it is valid to feel hurt. It is very valid to maybe miss that person who wasn't healthy for us. It's okay to feel those things. And taking that time to validate and to nurture, that's real self-love, is taking that time to turn inwards and nurture and validate your inner child, and find that within yourself so that you're not turning around and trying to have people who aren't capable of doing that or not emotionally available, like becoming emotionally available for yourself. And then the self-discipline with the inner teenager of, okay, well, we're feeling hurt. Are we going to engage, in over drinking or, abandoning, our responsibilities or chasing after this person? And so taking that time to really just nurture and really just be tender with ourselves and validation and that self-discipline so we don't continue getting ourselves in a situation where we continue to hurt our inner child and we end up protecting and loving ourselves.
Yeah, and also not feeling bad, if you've engaged in unhealthy behaviors yourself
Yes.
previously.
Yes.
we know no better.
Self-compassion,
Yeah,
self-forgiveness.
yeah. You just know that you now got the awareness to either change it or stay, and keep repeating that should you choose to do so. So these information episodes aren't about, highlighting behaviors that you might not be very proud of. It's about and beating yourself up about that. It's about, you know, acknowledging, yeah, I've probably contributed to what I've attracted in my previous relationships. I'm going to forgive myself for that.
Yes, self-compassion and self-forgiveness for all of that it's an important part of healing. And and letting go of that self-criticism and that self-hatred, and just having that compassion of I was doing the best I could, I was doing what I knew, but right now I'm learning more, and I made a mistake, and that's okay. How can we do better? What triggered us? Like, what were we feeling? What are healthier ways to engage in the future? And it's a process. Like, we can't just do this overnight or anything. Like, we're going to have mistakes, we're going to have lapses of judgment, we're going to slip back into certain things. It's about how quick do you catch yourself, and how do you treat yourself when you have these moments. And this kind of goes back to the inner child. Like, do you yell at a child when they make a mistake, or do you sit down and have a healthy conversation and gently guide them and help them understand and grow? And having that conversation with yourself, instead of criticizing your inner child and your inner teenager and shaming them. um, just learning how to talk to yourself in a healthy manner, like you deep down inside would talk to your friend, or talk to your child, or talk to your niece or nephew, or anybody. Like, having that compassion to just have a conversation, and that self-love is such a game changer.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think it's actually healthy for people to make mistakes, as long as, like you say, you are aware of that and you learn from it, and don't think mistakes are necessarily a bad thing. It's always an opportunity to learn and grow, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's absolutely, I 100% agree. It's not the mistake, it's what you do with the mistake that matters.
And I think the same with any perception around rejection. If you get into a relationship and it ends, or you go on a date and they don't follow up, it's not receiving that as a rejection, but just feedback that they're not the person for you.
Yeah, exactly. I think that is a wonderful point as well, because it is so easy to shift into what's wrong with me. Why am I not good enough? And just taking the time to be like, you are good enough. There's nothing inherently wrong with you. You just weren't the person's cup of tea, and that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the same, when you're filtering out people that aren't a good match for you, that we have to understand that guys might feel rejection on the back of us not
Yeah.
actually being into them. So just understand, it's the same in reverse. And, they're saving yourself from a lot of heartache going forward by being clear up front that, this isn't a
Yeah.
relationship for them. From being in a relationship with the wrong person, and helping you become available for the person that is the right person.
Yeah, I really like that, because and that kind of taps into like the ghosting like phenomenon that I think we have a lot. Is so many people don't know how to have this conversation of, hey, you're a really awesome person, I'm just not vibing with you. But you know our society is just like so used to, been this phenomena over the past couple of years of like ghosting. And I think there are appropriate times to ghost, but too many people do it so much, and that really kind of triggers, I think, a lot of big wounds in us. And but at the same time, that's someone who's clearly emotionally unavailable. They don't know how to have conversations, they don't know how to say those difficult things of, hey, like, those hard conversations, even if it's just simply, hey, like, I've really enjoyed talking to you, I think you're a great person, but I'm not feeling this, I wish you luck. Like, that's a sign of somebody who is emotionally available, someone who is capable of having hard conversations. And so when someone ghosts you, they're doing you a favor, because that's clearly somebody who doesn't know how to have a conversation, that's clearly somebody who doesn't know how to communicate right.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it might just be not right now. Then it
Mhm.
might be that they would be interested, but maybe it's not the right circumstances. Maybe they still on their own healing journey, and maybe in the future, that door could be opened again. Who knows? But
Yep.
it's all about, as I say, not taking it personally in the moment, isn't it?
And it's hard. I think that, all of us deep down inside, we want to be loved and we want to be cherished. And, once again, getting rejection, it really kind of goes into, that fear of not being good enough. And, it's hard to be rejected, especially if you have certain wounds around rejection. Like that is gut wrenching. Um, but it's not inherently bad, And I think that just learning how to like cope with it and learning how to do that internal dialogue and not let the thoughts of, I'm not good enough, what's wrong with me, that criticism, and learning just how to step into that space of compassion for yourself and the other person.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you're sort of saying have a dialogue with yourself, in terms of your inner child or your inner teenager, because I think sometimes we can look in the mirror as our adult selves and not give not be ready maybe to offer that self-love to that person that you see looking back at you. But certainly I think a lot of us can have compassion for the little girl we once were, and feel more able to love that little girl easier as a first step than probably our
Yeah.
current selves.
Oh, absolutely. And the inner child, like when you look at the dynamic of like the inner child and like the inner teenager, like our inner child is where our emotions are. Like that's the seed of emotions is related to our inner child as well as like our basic needs, and not necessarily like food and shelter, but I was kind of tapping into it earlier of like the desire to be loved, the desire to be cherished, the desire to be understood, the desire to be accepted. And so when I learned how to break all of that kind of concept down and then how it ties into the inner teenager, it was a game changer for me, and just learning how to talk to those versions of ourselves, because not all of us had parents who showed up for like those chapters in our lives. And, we try to, if we are somebody who had, unavailable parents or, abusive parents or whatever your parents are, like as a child, like we try to replicate that in our relationships to kind of heal that wound. And it's also just familiar, it's just what we know. And so learning how to tap into that, in my opinion, is a very vital part of dating. It is a very part of relationships and having a healthy relationship with those aspects of yourselves, so that those aspects of yourselves aren't trying to heal those wounds through emotional unavailability, through abuse, because that's all they know.
Yeah. So it's been such a fascinating conversation, Serena, and I'm sure we could go on for hours talking about this subject. But for those that are interested in connecting with you, what's your best contact information?
So my best right now is just Facebook, and it is Serena Faith. I have brightly colored hair, and so you can go to my personal profile, which is just Serena Faith, and I have like a banner. I know there's a ton of Serena Faiths, or my business page would be Serena Faith, and then it's like Single and Thrivin. Those are the best ways to. That's my biggest presence is on Facebook.
Excellent. So any final words, Serena, around what you can share in terms of a gem of wisdom or something practical that somebody could implement straight away on the back of the conversation we've had today?
Learning how to nurture your inner child through journaling, and that internal dialogue stuff that I kind of talked about, is one of the best forms of self-love, because it is the way that we talk to and we end up relating to ourselves. And so just taking some time, a daily or a couple times a week to journal and to, tap into your inner child, and start, when you're down on yourself or you're feeling unloved, like take the time to talk to yourself like you would be talking to, your younger version, your, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old self, and tell yourself everything that that version of yourself needed to hear. We can't change what happened in the past. We can't change the way that our parents showed up or didn't show up for us. But what we can change is the dialogue and the way that we relate to that aspect of ourselves, and start loving that version of ourselves the way that we need to be loved, because nobody else can do it for us as adults. We can only give that self for us, and we have to protect those parts of ourselves first and foremost. That's how we stop abandoning and neglecting ourselves.
I love that, and very cathartic and therapeutic to actually write stuff, isn't it? And even if you write it to actually burn it and screw it up and let, you know, in a sort of process of letting go of the past is quite a useful exercise as well, isn't it?
Actually, absolutely. Write your inner teenager or your inner child a letter and tell yourself everything you need to hear, and, you know, burn it or bury it or hold on to it, whatever you need.
Thank you so much, Serena. It's been a fascinating conversation, and I've really enjoyed talking about how you can be single and still thriving regardless of what your relationship status is.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
So it just leaves me to say that true love starts with opening our hearts. And until next time, goodbye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Hearts Entwined podcast. You can follow Lyn via the Facebook group Two Hearts Entwined, or search Lyn Smith, inspirational speaker, at LinkedIn, or email lyn@hearts-entwined.com. That's LYN@hearts-entwined.com. Remember, true love starts with opening our hearts.